Today I'm going to be continuing my coverage of the Zurich 1953 tournament. We are on to round number 4, and I have to be honest, I was going one by one in each game of this round, and although each game is instructive in its own way, there wasn't a single game that stood out to me until I got to the final game, Taimanov against Najdorf, game number 28, and this one is an absolute gem. I believe it won also a Brilliancy Prize, and even though I haven't even gotten through a fraction of the book yet, I do suspect that this is probably one of the best games of the entire tournament. So with that being said, let's go into the game. It is a very nice aggressive attack from Black's side, which is why I'm actually going to go through the game with Black's perspective, because this will show you how to build an attack when you start with the Black pieces. Now this is all super theoretical here. Knight to e1, also super theoretical. Just to mention the idea, typically in these sort of structures, White ends up having an advantage on the queen side and tries to attack with their pawns and also their pieces. So this move, Knight to e1, aims to reroute the knight towards the queen side, and because White is attacking on the queen side, Black in turn is going to try to push f5 at some point and attack on the king side, and this is exactly what happened. So here, Knight e7, the point being f5 coming, and then you can open up the position and get all of your pieces involved. Bishop e3, f5, we have f3, which creates a little pocket for the bishop on f2, and now this is a pretty nice defensive structure from White. We have the pawn covering some of the light squares, and the bishop and the other pawn at the dark square, so it seems like White is very safe here. And if you try to attack with only your pieces in this sort of position with the Black pieces, then that might not be so successful, so you have to go aggressive here, g5. And you have to go with your pawns and put your pieces directly behind your pawns and then begin to push. And this is exactly the theoretical continuation and the theoretical idea in this line, and also a very instructive one for other positions as well. So c5, White basically ignores Black's attack and tries to make counterplay on the queen side. Now here we have Knight g6, of course preparing to push g4 at some point, Rook c1, putting the rook on a much more open, much more useful file, especially with the prospects of taking at some point, and the rook can become an absolute monster here. And now came a super thematic idea in these sort of structures, and if you play the King's Indian or are planning to, then make sure you know and can implement this move, Rook f7. Because ultimately, well, the rook wants to come to the g file, right? Because you're going to play g4 and open this g file up. You want to attack the king. You want the rook on the g file. But going king h8 and then rook g8 is a little bit slow, and it only focuses on one part of the board. You're only focusing on the king side. Rook f7 is a much better way to achieve what you're trying to do on the king side, which is to get your rook to the g file, because it also has a very nice role on the queen side, patrolling over the 7th rank, offering some defensive ideas and defensive resources to the queen side, which is important because, well, White is going to be attacking here on the queen side. And once you move your bishop to f8, this pawn chain is also going to be supported. You're basically going to be able to support the queen side while attacking very strong and efficiently on the king side. So that's the whole idea of Rook f7. Now came Rook c2, and the idea in some ways is quite similar. White wants to control over the 2nd rank, and perhaps if these bishops clear out, offer some defense onto g2. And at the same time, I mean, stacking rooks in the future could definitely be an idea. Bishop f8, like we talked about, defending this important pawn chain, and especially in the case of like takes, this pawn here, if it falls, White gets a passed pawn, and these become weaker. This pawn becomes a very important piece in Black's position. So bishop f8 takes, pawn takes, and now queen to d2, looking to perhaps stack rooks, just clearing the back rank a little bit, giving White more freedom to move around their pieces. And now g4. Black says, it's clear that White's not really doing much on the queen side, so I should immediately take this opportunity and strike on the king side. g4. And now we have rook f to c1, indeed stacking. There was a chance here to play king h1, which some people might consider, and the idea is actually quite beautiful. After the move g3, bishop g1 takes. You can take the pawn here, and I think maybe objectively that's the best, but just to show this idea, there's this move bishop f2 now, and what you've done is sacrificed a pawn, but by doing so, you're basically locking black's attack. And it's true that, if black's knight or a piece manages to get to g3 and check this king, I mean, you have to be careful here still, but you have halted black's attack pretty significantly because this pawn doesn't want to be here. Black wants to have the ability to, send their forces in and attack along the h-file, but this pawn is really blocking their attack. So that is just a nice little defensive resource that could be very useful in some positions. But okay, here instead of this king h1, rook fc1 was played, trying to attack or defend by attacking, making some huge progress on the c-file. But now g3, we have pawn takes, and bishop takes. Black sacrifices a pawn, but opens up the position in a way that is very much advantageous for black. Their queen can now come in, and there's going to be a lot of pressure. And now knight h5 was played, and this is very much a multi-purpose move. Black wants to gain a lot of control over the dark squares, especially f4 here, is under a lot of control with the black pieces. Black also opens up the diagonal and opportunity for this queen to come into the attack. And of course, also opens up this f-file, which might not seem significant because the rook probably wants to go to g-file, but now the rook has more flexibility, which is always good. It can attack on the f-file and also on the g-file. So this is just a very healthy move to play in this sort of position. The bishop moves because it was, of course, attacked, and now bishop e7. And what is the idea with this move? Try to take a moment, right? What is the threat or the overall idea for black by playing bishop e7? The threat and the idea is going for bishop g5 here. And this would, of course, win some material and in general just activate the bishop along these dark squares. And here, white played the move knight to c1. And this does defend from the threat, even though it might not seem like it. How does it defend? Well, if bishop to g5 was played now, then rook takes c8. And white totally infiltrates. Remember when they stacked rooks? This is kind of where that comes into play. If you take the queen, they'll of course just take with check here and then recapture and be up a lot of material. And if you were to take, they take back, and your queen's in a bit of a sticky situation. If they take the rook, you lose your bishop, and otherwise you're going to lose your queen. It's basically game over here. So for that reason, after this move, knight b1, black did not go bishop g5, and instead chose this very nice move, bishop to d7, simply developing one of their final pieces and controlling the c8 square more heavily, making ideas like rook c8 basically impossible, and really re-emphasizing the threat of bishop g5. So here, queen to e1, finally getting away from this diagonal, and bishop g5 anyways, because the point was not only to win material, but also just to put the bishop on a super useful and super strong diagonal, and more so, this square here on e3 is super weak. I mean, you can imagine a bishop there totally terrorizing white's position. So knight to d2 was played here to defend the rook, but now bishop e3 check, and again, this bishop is just so powerful here in the heart of white's position, controlling many key squares. And so in this position, queen to g5 was played, and black is getting ready to really crush white. You can see some possibilities of attacking on g1. Of course, very much also possible to attack on g2 here. The queen is just in a very good square. And in this position, the move bishop f1 was played. And white basically says, let me try to resist as much I can. But here, I should mention, it was best to simply give away material. Something like knight c4, and after bishop takes rook, queen takes. It's true that white is now down material, but black's attack has been damaged. The bishop is gone, which was a key piece, and basically white is okay with giving away material for this bishop because this bishop was simply too powerful. But white instead insisted on keeping the material and went bishop f1 trying to hold the position together, but this is a little bit too late. Black's attack is just too powerful here. Rook to f8, a very nice idea, getting the final piece that has not been touched yet into the game, and now black is ready to absolutely crash through. Rook to d1 was played, and here I find this to be one of the more instructive moments of the game, because you might be thinking of all these attacking ideas, let's get the knight in here, let's, maybe go bishop h3, get this other knight, go here. There's so many attacking ideas that you're calculating, but black spends a moment to just play b5. And the point is, white's only idea with their last move was to unpin the knight, go knight c4, and really try to question this bishop and, if possible, trade this bishop, because this is a very powerful piece for black. So b5 simply takes this square out of white's control and stops any ideas of trading this bishop off, leaving this bishop here basically for the rest of the game, which is super instructive. Now the move a4 was played. White tries to sacrifice a pawn to open this up and trade the bishops, but black insists on controlling c4. And I mean, this is just absolutely incredible. You're not getting too focused on the attack. You always look at the whole board and notice that white's only source of counterplay was knight c4. Let's take that away from them and then focus on attacking. And this is indeed what happened. Rook to c7. White tries to activate a piece, but this does nothing. You need other pieces, not only a simple rook. And actually, after black puts their pieces on some more ideal squares, you'll see that the rook ends up going back because it realizes it has to defend, because again, you need more pieces than just one. But at this position, it's already a little bit too late here. Bishop h3 was played, which is a very beautiful idea. It should be noted that rook takes f3 was also possible, because after pawn takes, there's this beautiful idea, queen g1 check, bishop takes, rook takes, and mate on f3. So that was possible, and this kind of just illustrates the incredible powerful attack that black has here, even without a queen. They just have, I mean, look at the amount of pieces that black has without the queen, right? Remember, they lost a rook and a queen, and they still had so much power there. It's basically game over. And just to finish that line, if they don't take and just move their queen, let's say, well, then simply knight to g3 comes, and after bishop takes, even rook takes totally works. There's rook h3 coming with checkmate. If for some reason that doesn't work, you can always sacrifice, move the knight here and open this. I mean, the ideas here are basically limitless. So that was one possibility. Bishop h3 is also totally fine and works, but rook takes would have been a bit more direct. And of course, the idea now is just to add pressure onto this pawn here. And white decides to go queen e2 here. But just to go through some lines, if they were to take the bishop, then you can sacrifice again. And after rook takes, we have a very similar, almost identical line. And let's say they weren't going to take and just play a move g4, which makes some sense. It tries to lock up this g file and hoping to render these two pieces basically useless. But the issue is here simply knight takes f3. And again, the issue is this f file that black has totally in control is just killing them. And after the queen moves, knight takes even, and queen takes g4. And I mean, again, I can highlight all of the resources that black has here. It's going to end in checkmate. There's no doubt about it. So after bishop h3, because of all these lines, white played the move queen to e2, trying to hold the position together, defend this f3 square a bit more intensely, and not weaken their position further with taking or pushing. But this doesn't work either, of course. Knight takes g2, bishop takes, queen takes, and here queen to h4. Very instructive move. You obviously don't really want to trade if you're attacking and if you're in a better position. So queen to h4, simply putting pressure on this queen putting pressure on this bishop. These files are killing white here. And in this position, white took the rook on g7, which is of course suicidal. This is too much material to give away, especially because the attack continues. But just to illustrate why they took, if they were to move, this is going to end in checkmate. Here, you're not only winning the queen wherever they moved, but more importantly, you're actually just going to be checkmating them. After the king moves, you can even play queen h3 here, a very nice, solid move, looking to take with the queen. And after rook takes, queen takes f3, it's checkmate. So the important thing is not even winning the queen here, it's the fact that your attack continues, which is why queen takes g7 tried to put an end to the attack, but this was unsuccessful as well because, well, look at all these pieces, and especially this bishop here controlling g1. That is the source of black's attack mostly. So it was super important for white not to let this bishop stay here. And again, knight c4 in that critical moment would have given away material, but taken away this huge attacker. So that's a very instructive point. But okay, rook g2 check, the king moves to h1, and white tried to hold on here, but not for long. After rook g3, bishop f2, rook to g4 was played, queen h3, knight d2. Again, the idea for white is to get as many pieces into this area of the board to defend, but after h5, white played rook g5, but then resigned because they realized the inevitable, which is that this attack is too powerful. And just to illustrate why it's too powerful, here, for example, rook g8 was possible, even trading material, because you don't even really need this rook. You just need these pieces here. And there's too many threats now. This pawn is a little weak in some cases. This square, of course. So, for example, bishop takes here, followed, and let's just show that. Let's say they move the rook, bishop takes, followed by mate. So there's too many threats, too many issues here. Also, this one I should note. So there's too many issues basically here. It's game over. So this game was just really instructive. First of all, this very nice b5 move, controlling every aspect of the game, not giving even an inch of counterplay to your opponent. This bishop on e3 that's highlighted, super powerful, controlling the entire board and really the heart of black's attack here. And also instructive is how black very methodically brought every piece into the game. The bishop from f8 to this path, eventually to e3. Even the bishop on d7 played a role. The knights maneuvered very nicely. So, you know, the way that black just brought upon the attack in this game was super instructive and worth actually watching even twice. So I'll leave the PGN down below if you want to run through the game yourself. This was just an incredible game to end this round number 4. Hopefully you enjoyed. Stay tuned for the future rounds. And if you are missing any of the rounds that I've already covered, round 1, 2, and 3, then links for them will be in the description. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I will see you next time. Peace out.